This is Steve Jewin from MMAmania.com, AngryMarks.com, and many other places on the internet, and I'm here tonight with the one and only Sean Grande from Bellator MMA. Sean, how are you doing tonight?
I don't know if I've ever been called the one and only. That could be both. That could be a backhanded compliment. That could mean a lot of different things. People could be thankful there's only one.
No, I think actually two of you would be great, because then you would have more of you to go around for all these Bellator shows you're doing.
You know what? As soon as you said that, I said, with the schedule I've seen that we're going to be doing coming up, I said a second meeting with the Celtics and all the other jobs I have. I'm starting to like your way of thinking.
Exactly, especially since you've got back-to-back shows coming up here in Thackerville on Friday and Saturday night. Then you've got next week in Florence, Italy, and then you got another show the week after that. The train just doesn't stop.
Yeah, and that's Dublin the week after. So this has been. This is going to be an adventure of a month. I've been preparing my son. He just turned 5. I've sort of been preparing him for this month. Like, we've been looking at the calendar for a long time. I think I'm going to see him for about 30 hours in the month of December. I counted up. We were counting them last night. The two of us were counting up. I think I have 23 or 24 flights in the month of December, something like that.
Wow, I cannot even imagine. Yeah. It's amazing that you're able to do it and keep your sanity, but you've been with Bellator for over a year now, so you must be getting used to the grind.
Yeah, it's been fascinating in every possible way. You know, the grind's what we're kind of joking about, is the grind and all the shows, and what's been a great thing for Bellator, obviously, all of the expansion and the interest and more shows and more big fighters coming and more big fights. That's the real story, not my busy travel schedule or not seeing my son. Nobody cares about that. It's how well that's good news that all that stuff is happening, and it's been rewarding in just about every possible way.
Well, I for one care about your son. I hope you do get to see him for Christmas at least. You'll be home for Christmas, right?
Christmas Day, Celtics and the Knicks in Madison Square Garden.
So you're still working.
That one, you kind of get used to that one. That's Celtics have either played or traveled on Christmas Day pretty much every year. Every year I've been there. That's sort of that's kind of an NBA holiday. If you're one of the top 10 teams in the league, the teams that people are interested in seeing, they're going to be playing on Christmas Day.
That is very true. In fact, when I get together with the in-laws on Christmas, that's all they seem to be doing is watching the NBA. So I'm very familiar. But back to the subject of Bellator at hand. I want to get your perspective now with the passage of time, people getting used to you instead of Sean Wheelock. How is it feeling now after this year and change since we last talked?
I really think, it's funny. It's an interesting time to kind of, it's been such a breakneck schedule. You don't really stop to think back about a year ago. There are moments within the context of a broadcast, not necessarily when it happens, but later watching it back, I'll say, well, that's something I couldn't have done a year ago. That's something I didn't know a year ago. That's something that would not have happened. There's sort of little moments that kind of mark the progression. But I'd say probably the biggest, I don't want to say surprise to me, was that I'll put it this way, I was overly cautioned about quote unquote MMA fans, and that it was going to be rough, and no matter what, because Sean obviously is so passionate about the product and had been such a long time fan, and I was really prepared for the worst. And I think probably when we talked then, all I could do was all I could do, which was work as hard as I possibly could. And I think the people that warned me were just sort of, first of all, they were generalizing, which is never a good idea. But I think generally speaking, people, and I've been overwhelmed by the reaction. I've been just shocked by it. It's been so rewarding to be, accepted to whatever degree you ever really get accepted by people, that I think my guess is the people know that I'm trying what I've tried to do, and the viewer decides, is show respect for the sport that I've really come to love, and the fighters who I just could not have so much respect for and just enjoy telling their story. And it was never, I think, in the early days when it happened, those first couple of days, obviously the story was about me to some degree, but this isn't about that. It's about Bellator. It's about these fighters and telling the stories. And as I think we talked about a year ago, creating an easier platform for Jimmy Smith to be as good an analyst as I know that he is.
And I feel like you definitely fit into that role very well because the chemistry, it's a different chemistry than he had with Sean Wheelock, but it is still a good chemistry, and you do provide that for him. You give him the chance to go in there and call those technical aspects, and you get to tell those stories and provide your honest opinion on things while also putting over the fighters at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that's really what it's all about. Is that I'm coming where I'm coming from. People, I almost found, I don't want to call it an inferiority. I would get here, I got here, and it was almost as if people, longtime fans of MMA, almost didn't realize the degree to which the sport had grown and gotten used to it. If you're a fan of it, like I've done college hockey my whole life, and I've stayed with it because I always try to go back and do the Frozen Four because it's something that's very important to me and always was. But it's a very tiny, small little niche thing. And so I understand the notion of being sensitive about the lack of attention it gets and the lack of treatment it gets and all the things that come with being a smaller sport. And I think when I first started here, I sensed some of that, and it was almost as if when you're in it, you don't realize how big it has gotten. And that I rejected the notion that I was coming from mainstream sports into MMA as if MMA was not a mainstream sport. I thought that was just kind of ridiculous. And so, to me, it was from a sports television standpoint, I really just was trying to bring what I do, which is let's try to make it seem more like a major league sports telecast. And I think there are a lot of elements that go into that. I am one very small piece of it. A lot of it is in the production that you see. If you watch a Bellator show now and watch the shows from a couple of years ago, I think you'll see a difference just in the overall, the way the show is produced and presented as sports television, I think is continuing to evolve. And that's been really cool to see.
Oh, and I've definitely seen it evolve over the years because I go way, way back to when it was on different platforms like MTV2 and Fox Sports. I've seen a lot of changes over the years in the way Bellator is presented, but it's always struck me from the very beginning.
You mean back in the days before Bjorn Rebney became a labor leader?
Yeah, well, that actually is a good segue. We can go ahead and go with that. I was kind of surprised when I saw the conference call details and it said, George St. Pierre, Cain Velasquez, and Bjorn Rebney. I was like, oh my God, it's the former Bellator president back on the scene. That threw me for a curve. I didn't know what to think.
Yeah, I'm surprised there hasn't been a folk song written about him. I think that's what all the old school Bellator people here are kind of just, I'd say amazed would be an understatement that this is how he has resurfaced. But all of my Bjorn Rebney experience is 100% secondhand. So I mean, it's just more punchline than anything else. But obviously, a lot of people that I'm very close to were here during those tumultuous days. Everybody has an opinion on him. I'll say that.
Well, since everybody has an opinion, instead of an opinion about Bjorn, let's have it be an opinion about basically a players' union for mixed martial arts, like the NBA Players Union, the Major League Players Union. Now we're going to have a fighters' union. What do you think? Is this going to work?
Everyone around me who knows more than I do is very skeptical of it. I will say this. I believe, and this is the other thing I believe about me starting here at this time, and as I said, people talked in 2015, a year ago, hey, it's this mainstream sports guy. He's coming over to MMA. You got to step back and realize where MMA is now and where it is from a popularity standpoint. And we're talking about the $1 billion sale of UFC and these television rights that are coming up and all these big shows that both the promotions are doing. Other stuff is going to have to catch up to it. And this being the first big year of free agency, you realize there are some aspects of MMA which are on par with the major sports in television coverage and the treatment, and there are others that are just decades behind. This is certainly one of them. And to watch it in real time is truly fascinating. To know the history of labor issues and free agency in Major League Baseball. I think the first time, how hardcore you watch all the shows, the first Ben Henderson walkout in his fight in April, I talked about Curt Flood because he's probably the most important player in Major League history that younger people don't know and don't know the significance of him, that he was the first free agent. He gave up the end of his career to go to court in what eventually led to free agency. in Major League Baseball and the other sports, and so the game has been changed forever. I think I opened the show the other night talking about free agency, that we had a Michael Chandler-Ben Henderson fight that wouldn't have been possible years ago, but free agency has changed every game, and here's the difference. For the fans, it's great, because free agency in sports, I'm watching LeBron right now, for the Cavs. LeBron goes to Miami, that's good for Miami. In MMA, free agency is good for the fans, because wherever the fighters go, you're going to get great new matchups that you didn't think were possible. It is, to me, as an individual sport, this is going to be very difficult and a long process to get it, I don't want to even say on par, but to get the thing organized. That said, something has to happen. And I am I'm for supply meeting demand, first of all. That's number one. That's the nice thing about being a free market libertarian. But number two, I want to see the fighters taken care of. I don't blame promotions or whatever. This isn't about that. It's about how do we make sure the fighters are taken care of and are better taken care of? Not just financially. I mean, in terms of healthcare and all that other stuff. How do we make sure that the athletes who put their lives into this are getting back what they should? And that, to me, is going to be a long process, and it's happening with free agency and with two major promotions happening and with the sale of the UFC, and everything seems to be happening at once. You rarely recognize the significant moments of history in a sport. When you're in them, you're in it right now in MMA.
Absolutely. And if I can tie this all together with something that just coincidentally I happened to be reading in ESPN magazine today, an interview with Carmelo Anthony where he was talking about the issue of players versus owners and players versus teams. And what he said, I think, is relevant to the whole idea of a fighters union, because he said the players have the power, they just don't realize it. We would all have to walk out together, and then they would know who really has the power. But you're never going to see every MMA fighter just walk out of a UFC show or a Bellator show. It's not going to happen.
Because the mindset is, when somebody gets hurt, or somebody misses them, tomorrow night, when Emmanuel Sanchez gets hurt and can't fight, you got 100 guys that want that spot against AJ. Are you kidding me? To make your name, to be the first one to beat AJ McKinney? Mm-hmm. Guys want that spot. So that's going to be the mentality, in an individual sport. Teams aside, and I think that's another fascinating element here with AKA and American Top Team and Alliance and all that. It's fascinating, the teams within the individual sport and how that's evolving, and Jackson Wink and everybody. But people want that spot. So how is that going to factor into a union? And I think talking about it is good. I think talking about free agency is good. I think having the discussions are good, but getting there, I think, is going to be a long process.
I agree. It's going to be a long process, but like you said, we are at that moment right now in the sport where we can see the whole landscape changing right in front of us in real time. So it's a very fascinating time on both sides of the coin as both a fan and a reporter to be watching it unfold in front of me. And since you mentioned injuries and fighters stepping in on short notice, we've had a whole lot of that between Bellator 166 and 167. Yep. We had the Pat Curran fight, he dropped out, and then we had a Derek Campos Patricky Ferry fight, and Ferry dropped out, and then Emmanuel Sanchez, as you mentioned, he dropped out. So how tough has it been for you to readjust your research and your game plan for everything you want to talk about with all of these changes?
Yeah, Jimmy, that was the first thing. Jimmy and I are different anyway, because Jimmy wants to know that night who's fighting, and, the next show is on what date. That's all he wants to know. With me, just the way my mind works and the way my life works with my work and my other schedule, we're going to have a show in April. I kind of need to know now, like, when it's going to be and where it's going to be. So the way that, I want to do my charts and get my stuff and get as far ahead of the game as you can. And he was kind of chuckling about it, knowing how many last minute substitutions there are and changes. And that's all. Hey, the second show I did, we had a very late, we had Marlos Conan fight. It was going to be a prelim fight. And about 20 minutes before we went on the air, we lost the first fight. Somebody wasn't cleared medically, so I went from the prelims to the main card, and that was my, sort of my education. I was okay. This is not, we're not in Kansas anymore, except, if Dave Nichols is fighting, which we are in Kansas. And, that's, to me, has all been part of the fun. But I was bummed out. Listen, injuries happen, cards just happen in UFC and Bellator all year long. How many big fights got scrapped at the last second? Obviously, it really, in Bellator, you've not only had the Jordan Parsons tragedy, but Kimbo Slice, so we've had, like real life things to deal with, and not just injuries and people subbing out. The Campos Tricky fight, I'm sure will happen at some point. I was really bummed about that Jeff AJ McKee. I thought that had a chance to be a real special fight. That, to me, the story of Bellator in 2016, as we turn the calendar, which has been fascinating, is that, and you mentioned, you bring up the name Jordan Rebney. Bellator now has all the old school guys that have been here forever. The Pitbulls, Michael Chandler, Andre Korskov has been here for a while, Daniel Strauss, Joe Warren, and this has been the core group, Dantas and Galvo. They've been here for years and years, and all of a sudden in 2016, they're getting besieged on both sides, because first come the high-profile free agents, and Ben Henderson is here, and Phil Davis is here, who's now the light heavyweight champion, and Matt Mitrione is here, and here they come on one end, and on the other hand come all these young lions, the Goichi Yamuchis and the AJ McKees, and this is before we, the Emmanuel Sanchez, this is even before we, and by the way, we're going to see somebody on Saturday night named Andre Fialou, and if you haven't seen him yet, this is a killer at welterweight. He had his first sort of bigger fight against Chidi Njokuani. This is his first real step up in competition. He's 7-0, basically all first round knockouts in the first 60, 75 seconds. And so there's prospects on one side climbing up the ladder, and there's the free agents coming on the other side, and everybody's getting squeezed, and the competition's never been better, and it's kind of fun. And I, selfishly, with my Bellator glasses, what I would like to see is people treating Bellator that way, and not this sort of concept that UFC is what it is, and Bellator is all about, the Bellator just does those fun fights. Because I gotta tell you, I've been here a year and a half, and we've done about 30 shows or 25 shows, and by my math, we've done exactly 2 of those fights. Now, granted, they were on the same night, and granted, everybody was watching, but it's funny when we have fights like Chandler and Henderson that are legitimate. These have been the 2 top lightweights in Bellator and the UFC for years and years. They go head to head, and yet it doesn't seem to resonate that there are also top 10 big time fights in Bellator as there are in the UFC. So I like the fact that we're a full service restaurant.
I agree. I've always thought it strikes the balance between the sports entertainment side and the pure athletic side, and I think Bellator 170.
You've got that sports entertainment. You're jonesing for it too. I know you're not. You love it.
Yeah, well, I got to work it in
somewhere. You love it when I have a TNA mention or Bobby Lashley, Jerry Lawler's there. All these little subtle references I like to sneak in.
Well, the reason I'm going with Bellator 170 is it's a perfect example on several different levels, because on the one hand, you have pure entertainment with Tito Ortiz and Chael Sonnen, 2 of the biggest trash talkers in the business, and they're going to throw down, they're going to leave the words behind and get it on in the cage, but at the same time, you got some seriously intriguing fights, a complete style versus style throwback in Halak Gracie and Isaki Kato, and a fun bang-em-up scrap of a welterweight fight in Paul Daly and Brennan Ward, so it's a little something for everybody.
I gotta tell you, talking to the fighters today, the 2 things that came out of the outside of just preparing for the shows was how eye-opening, disappointed everybody was in the MVP fight, and obviously we all were last week. But the other thing is how excited, without even prodding or asking, how excited people are about Brennan Ward and Paul Daly. I thought, and Brennan Ward is his own character within his talent and within the way he fights. I thought the moment he had with Syed Awad, which was obviously going to be a firefight no matter how that was going to go, but the moment against the cage in the first round in which Syed Awad said, "Do you want to wrestle or do you want to bang?" And Brennan just let him go and said, "Bro, let's bang." I thought that was the quintessential Brennan Ward moment, and one of the great Bellator moments ever. And it's, he's a fun guy to watch. And I think you can be a high level top 10 fighter and also be a fun guy to watch. And you're right, January, that show at the Forum, which is going to be obviously a great venue. And if you're an NBA person, I think my first year in the NBA was the last year the Lakers played in the Forum. So it's obviously a pretty cool building with a lot of history to do a show from.
And there's even better news about that show. UFC canceled their pay-per-view scheduled for the same night in Anaheim, so it's uncontested on TV and uncontested in California.
Yeah, I thought you were, isn't it funny, and you would appreciate this more than anybody, I think so many people, because everybody, even casual wrestling fans, are so hungry and so obsessed and beloved of that and worshiping of the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars. They really wanted this to sort of be that. And when one is an over-the-air TV company and the other is primarily a pay-per-view company, it's not gonna work that way. It really is apples and oranges. But I think part of the beauty of that time in that industry was you just never knew who was going to show up on, at its best, who's going to show up on which show. And I'll tell you something that nobody knows, and this will be your own personal exclusive. The night that Rory McDonald signed, which is also in Anaheim at the Pond, are one of the things we had discussed and we were going to do. But he literally had physically not signed his, we remember seeing some of the video that he signed his contract in the back during that show. He hadn't signed his contract, so he could not legally open the show with it, but we were going to do the, we open the show, we come inside, I think AJ McKee was walking before that, in that moment, we were going to do the car pulling up outside the pond, and, what's going on here? And out walks Rory McDonald. Because I think people like it. And I don't think I just think people want to be as entertained as they can be in addition to having the fighting. It's why we do the screens and we have the walks and we, you want to embrace every single part of this.
I think we did get a little bit of that, though. Even if we didn't get Rory McDonald stepping out of the limo, we got Matt Mitrione meeting Fedor Emelianenko in his sweater.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we hit Fedor up in Napa for a few days, before that moment. And we had, if you watched it, it's funny because my feeling is do that stuff because it's fun on TV and it's entertaining. And I think some people get obsessed with, the internet, and a couple of people may know. And if you want, go back and watch the tape with them standing there, Jimmy and Matt at the bottom of the ramp. There's some fan yelling out, "Fedor, it's Fedor!" And it's like, all right, aren't you cool being the kid who knows the magician's tricks who's sitting in the front row? It's like, it's fun. It's fun television. And yeah, some people knew it was Fedor. A lot of people didn't. And it's going to be fun. It was great TV anyway. So I think there's you can embrace a lot of different aspects of the business and of the entertainment aspect and still have great fights when the bell rings, or not great fights like Carvalho and Manhoff, which is why we have to do that one again next weekend.
Before we talk about that one next weekend, I want to rewind back to one you mentioned a little bit ago, which was Michael Page and Fernando Gonzalez. How difficult was it to call that action with Jimmy Smith when there really wasn't any action? Well,
I think that what you find is funny, the reason when I say Carvalho Manhoff, I think that was the moment that people knew. I haven't really been coached or told what to do. I think that the two things that people will notice, the first thing that got some attention right away was that I would mention the UFC during the show. And there was simply no other way I was going to do it. I think it is childish. I think it treats the audience like they're morons if you don't acknowledge, if Ben Henderson shows up. Now, he was quite a fighter in another organization. I mean, what kind of an idiot do you sound like if you're doing that? And that was number one. And number two is, there's going to be bad fights. You can't tell a fan that a bad fight is a good fight. And so the storyline becomes, as it happens, as that is unfolding, the storyline with MVP goes, is this a weakness in MVP's game? Now he's going to have to fight somebody. You take the conversation forward to what people are talking about. And to me, that's a contemporary way to do it. And I know I got a lot of reaction when the Carvalho Manhoff, the thing happened, and I'd been on the job for 6 or 7 months at that point, and that horrific fight happened in front of us. And what are you going to do? Are you going to pretend it was a good fight, or are you going to call it what it was? And in the moment, I think what I said, and then the decision was horrible. In my view, Rob Hines and I had a very pleasant and civil conversation about it after the fact, which I think, by the way, is what's good. There was an online conversation about that I actually jumped in on with Jimmy Smith and Rob and other people about the decision in that fight. And I think the discussion is good. The fact that most people thought that decision was wrong. I love I know I'm jumping around, but the Henderson-Chandler fight, which, by the way, we will be spending some time on during the show tomorrow night in a sort of an instant classic kind of way. We're going to look back and talk about the fight a little bit because it was just that good. The beauty of it to me, in addition to being an extremely high-level fight, is that the rounds were virtually all of them were, you could have a real discussion about them. Was round 1 10-8 or 10-9? Who won round 2? Was round 5 10-8 for Ben Henderson? You know what I mean? And then the fourth round was very close. So I love that each round could have gone a different way. You can have, the more discussion about it to me, the better it is. But after the Carvalho-Manoff fight was over, so the only thing more disappointing in that fight was that decision. And if you're not connected enough to the audience or not treating them like they are watching the fights with you, then I don't think you're really have your finger on the pulse of what you should be doing here. Because everybody knows a bad fight and everybody knows a good fight. And you can't, I think fans are just too sophisticated to pretend the other organization doesn't exist, and they're too sophisticated to not know a bad fight when they see it. The bad fight happens. Why was it a bad fight? What does that tell you about MVP? Was it just a bad night for him? Does he have to fight somebody a little more cachet next? To me, there's always a discussion. I thought the Carvalho-Manoff fight was so fascinating in how bad it was, and unexpectedly bad, because it made no sense. We thought it would be a great fight. I was the first one to say, I think we should do it again. And it turns out we're going to do it again next week. But to me, you had a bad decision and a fight that you couldn't look away from. It was such a train wreck. That can't possibly happen again. So to me, you can find there's almost something interesting in everything that happens. As bad as the MVP fight was, the fact that it was that way, to me, that turns a new page of, what's interesting and what's not about MVP. Now it's like you look at him a different way. That's not a bad thing. You embrace it.
I agree. And if I can take it on a personal note with tying Carvalho-Manoff into this discussion, I get called the Bellator homer by some of the guys who read MMA Mania. They like to rib me. Oh, you're the Bellator guy. You don't even watch UFC. They clearly know that's not true, that I follow the sport as a whole, but they like to try to see if they can push buttons. And they think that I'm going to always say that a Bellator fight is great, even when it's not. And as I was doing the live play-by-play on the website during Carvalho-Manoff, I was like, there's no way. Even if I wanted to sell this, even if I was the Bellator guy that they think I am, there's no way I can sugarcoat this. And I wrote in my play-by-play, this is bloody awful. I can't believe they just turned. At the end of the fourth round, when they turned and walked away before the bell even rang, I was like, this is awful.
Yeah, and as I said, the strange thing about it was that made no sense. How could a Melvin-Manoff fight? How could a Melvin-Manoff fight have gone that way? And how could a judge have given a round? 2 of the 3 judges gave the first round to Carvalho when he did not land a strike. Not one. In the entire round. So,
in my own play-by-play, I called that a 10-10 round. I said nothing happened. Nobody won that round.
Yeah. That's what I thought too. It's funny, John McCarthy and I talked about that. Could be the first ever 10-10 round. And if you remember, in the second round, Jimmy, I always ask Jimmy his scorecard. He was kind of stammering a little bit. And I said, hey, you mind if I take this one for the first time? And he goes, yeah, what was your score? I said, 0-0. So that's kind of how I thought. The first round.
But it is definitely.
Like I said, to me,
it is a fascinating story now, because with Carvalho and Manoff, they both have something to prove now with this rematch, because neither one of them wants to be defined by that fight.
Exactly right. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't run from it. It was a bad fight. Wow, that was oh my gosh, that was a bad fight. And guess what? We're still talking about it. Months later, I felt bad for the people of Boise. The people were so great in Boise. They packed the place. They were so pumped up, and it was just not a great, it's one of those that everybody has. It was just not a good night of fight. It was just sort of like either the matchups didn't work out or it's just bad luck. Like it happens sometimes. And I felt so bad that here they get this main event, which should have been explosive, and they didn't. I'm sure we'll be, if they'll have us, I'm sure we'll be back at some point. But it's interesting that people say that and people still want to choose sides. Are there people who work for the UFC that would like to see Bellator go away? I'm sure it would make their life easier. Are there people in Bellator who think that they're going to, Bellator is one day going to take over and be the industry leader? And I'm sure there are. But to me, 2 strong promotions make the sport much bigger. And my issue, and it's funny, you would be called a homer. I have 2 issues as having been here, coming from a different perspective for a year, and all the Bellator stuff. This is where I work. The treatment of if other sports were treated on ESPN the way that MMA is treated, in which everything is you, and listen, there's always agendas, and obviously they want in on the next TV deal, I totally get it. But if ESPN did all SEC and did not even mention the Big 12, people would go berserk if that happened. And, the sports media critics and people like that would call them on it. And the other thing, I think, and it's just a carryover, I think, from the way it used to be, and still that little leftover fear from the old days that if you didn't cover the UFC the way they wanted you to, from what I've read 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 6 months ago when some people got kicked out of the show, that the rankings to me, I shake my head at like, all right, you're telling me the top 10 guys in one division are all in the, I think it hasn't really caught up. Clearly there are more fighters on the UFC roster and more very good fighters. But as John McCarthy, as any of the people who work for both will tell you, the top guys in one are largely interchangeable with the top guys in the other. And I would love to see more acknowledgement of that. And the more fights like Michael Chandler and Ben Henderson we have, the more that will happen. But you'd like to see that gap, the recognition gap, closed for the fight, for the top fighters in Bellator. That's kind of my hope for 2017.
Well, I think we're going to continue to see that with guys coming both directions, coming to and from UFC and Bellator, because by all tokens, we've seen Rory McDonald and Phil Davis come in and be successful in Bellator, but then we've got Will Brooks and Marcin Held going over and being successful in UFC.
Yeah.
So it's going both ways.
It is, and we've seen, and it's funny, and guys are going to have different levels of success. We've seen guys come over here, at different stages of their career. Ben Henderson hadn't won a round until maybe that second, depending on how you scored it. And I know Jimmy is someone, and other people did too, scored the first 4 rounds for Chandler in that fight. I thought Ben Henderson won the second round, but if you had it scored that way, Ben Henderson was 10, 11 rounds into his Bellator career before he won a round. Now, granted, he was, he jumped into the deep water to his credit, and he fought the best of the best. But I love the fact that people are going back and forth, and they're going to be testing the water, and you're going to have, to me, not a long-time person in the sport. If I were a long-time fan, I would be, pumped and jacked about the possibility of, what would happen if this guy ever fought this guy. And now whether it's in Bellator or the UFC, these are the kind of things that can happen.
Absolutely. And to me, the whole idea that, goes back to the Fighters Union is that how, we're going to see guys jumping from one side to another or even jumping to a third side like World Series of Fighting. And if you're in a Fighters Union, how does that even work if the union becomes tied to one sports organization or another? Right. It can't possibly, you've got guys, like you said, it does come down to individuals at the end of the day. People want to step in when somebody gets injured and want to fight on short notice. You're going to have a guy who isn't under contract, who may have had his last fight in Bellator, who's like, shit, there's an opening in UFC. I'll go take this fight. World Series Fighting needs a main event. I'll go.
So this is the difficulty. But like I said, all discussion is good discussion, and hopefully organized efforts. Hopefully everything moves it forward, and there's not a group that doesn't have it together, and that's the whole thing back. You just want it to take baby steps forward, and you want the industry to grow. The industry doesn't grow if there's more money for fighters, then more guys want to fight. More high-level athletes want to fight. Look at again, going back to Bellator again, but look at the Fab Five here. The elite, the Tyrell Fortunes, and, Jared Trice is going to have his first fight.
Wait. He told me it's Gerard, so I better tell you right now.
Yes, that's right. That's right. We're told. We were just told. Isn't it funny? I'll tell you a funny story about that. And how that stuff works, because people wonder all the time. We had a player in the NBA playing for the Celtics. His name was Mark Blount. But for years in the NBA, his first 5-6 years in the NBA, he was Mark Blount. And you wonder, how does that kind of thing happen? Well, this is 6-7 years into his NBA career. We're flying into Toronto, which is the one city in the NBA that's different because you have to go through customs. Sometimes they'll just bring the customs agent on the plane and you'll walk through and just do like a checkoff or whatever. And so we're in Toronto and we're all getting off the plane. And we all say our names as we go by, and we're, in the back of the plane. It's like, Grande, okay, go ahead. And all of a sudden, behind me, I hear Blunt. And we turned around, and did you just say Blunt? And he goes, yeah. So we've been calling you Mark Blount for 7 years. He goes, yeah, I know. Well, didn't you say anything? He said, no, I didn't really care that much. So, this is the high level where this kind of thing, this kind of thing happens.
No, I thought it was funny because, like 15 seconds into the interview, I've got all these questions, and I'm like, Jared Trice, so good to talk to you today. And he's like, it's Gerard. I'm like,
yep,
oh,
Gerard.
I just, the feces at the rotary blade right away. It's like, wow. Why can't they send a pronunciation guide out before we do these interviews?
Well, you know what? It's like, these are the kind of things, media guides, record books. Obviously, I've been pushing Gerard. You've seen a lot more, we have a guy named Corey Brady who does great research for us, and Russ Winham who works on graphics. And this is an area, anyone that follows me on Twitter knows I do a lot of this stuff myself. I've used Twitter for almost graphics that you can't really, you can explain them on radio if you're calling a game on radio, but it makes more sense. People have their tablets open and they have their phones open when they're listening to the game or watching the game. So sometimes I'll tweet something that's like a TV graphic because I like those kind of things. And I've been pushing for more and more of that stuff so we can know right away, hey, that was the fastest knockout. That was the fastest submission. We just had one, with Karatanov getting knocked out by Javi Ayala. And if you watch it back, between all of us working together on the record book and all the new stuff we have, we were able to say immediately it was the sixth fastest knockout, whatever, in Bellator history, that kind of thing. So, but pronunciation guides, media guides, all this stuff to me is about, moving the sport forward, because I think we have to catch up to the popularity of the sport in terms of the television production, which is what we're trying to do, and just, the media coverage and every other aspect, because nothing comes in lockstep. It all's going to, unions and media coverage and records and all the different things that come with it and fighter pay and help. It's all going to, happen when it happens, but you just want to see it all moving forward.
And one other thing that's going to have to happen, and people do need to keep in mind that MMA is a relatively young sport compared to sports like baseball, NBA, hockey. It takes time for these things to evolve, but one of these other things that's going to have to evolve is respect for the reporters covering the sport as well as for the athletes competing in the sport. And you kind of hinted at that with what happened at UFC with credentials being pulled from a very famous reporter. And I've been in some tense situations myself, not where I was like, your credentials are revoked, get out of here, but where I've been covering a fight for Wrestling Observer and had Dana White right in front of me say, Dave Meltzer doesn't know shit. I'm like, ooh, that makes me feel very awkward because I'm here with a Wrestling Observer credential and I don't know if I should leave the room now.
One of the things that it's funny, I had a little Twitter thing with Dave a couple weeks ago, but I was reading the Observer. I think I was like 13 years old when I started reading the Observer. So, listen, I've done, knock on wood, I've done a couple of things. I've called Game 7 of the NBA Finals. I've done a couple of things in my career. Yet, being in the Observer was what I kind of, in our terminology, I kind of marked out for that a little bit when I first saw it, because it was like, all of a sudden I realized I had this moment last year when the whole thing happened. It happened it happened slowly in some ways, but then quickly at the end when it happened, I had this moment where I realized, wow, I'm eligible for the Wrestling Observer Worst Announcer of the Year category. Who could have imagined that one day that would be possible?
Yeah, well, I don't think Sean Grande is going to get my vote for that award category anytime soon.
Hey, it's I gotta tell you, like I said at the start, I was surprised because I just thought I wasn't necessarily put in a great position, obviously, given the way everything happened, and whoever was going to end up taking this job was not, I think, going to be put in a great position, because obviously Spike had made the decision to make a change, whoever it was going to be. But I think that fans, for the most part, it's like an airline pilot. You know what? Fly the plane and land the plane. We don't need to know, on the one hand, I think listen, we're asking all of you to have Jimmy and I in your house and in your living room. And, we're very aware of that. We try to keep our feet off the furniture and stuff like that. But we're trying to enhance your enjoyment of the show. But the enjoyment of the show is fights and the fighters and the stories and the things that are going on in Bellator. I think that's what people tune in to see. And hopefully, I think with someone like me, it's usually that it goes on to be like, Grande, he's a football guy, he's whatever. And then eventually, you kind of say, you know what? I kind of get a kick out of that guy once in a while, and it's that kind of thing. No, nobody's here to, the show's not about us. I mean, it's a lot more about Jimmy than it would be about me, because I want to hear him explain to fans who are new. And that's the other thing you deal with in broadcasting all the time. Remember, the hardcore of the hardcore fan who watched UFC 1 and has watched every show and lives and breathes the sport. I don't want to do the dismissive, you're watching anyway, but our job is to grow the game. Our job is to have, frankly, people like me who might watch an NBA game on a Friday night, watch Bellator instead, or in addition to, and become fans of the sport. And so the fans that are going to be there, we love them dearly, but you love the sport. We want to grow the sport. We want more fans coming in. I think that's a problem sometimes with every smaller sport as it grows, is that you love the sport so much, you're like, who are all these new people? In Boston, they call them the pink hats, because all these Red Sox fans started showing up wearing these pink Red Sox hats and buying up all the expensive tickets. And you're like, wait, I was here first. I've been here for years. Now who are all these people? But the more fans, the better. It grows the game. And that's why you got, thousands and thousands of people in Melbourne, Australia, and all around the world, and the MSG show being what it was. And it's just, it's exciting times for the game.
And I don't want to overhammer this point, but I don't think I can let it go too lightly either. When you want to grow the sport and you want it to continue to reach bigger audiences, you need the Ariel Helwanis of the world who are going to be there in your corner to tell those stories. You can't just yank their credentials and kick them out the door because you don't like the way they cover the fights.
And listen, you have to, I can certainly understand. I'll tell you exactly what it was funny because people snap pictures of it. I know I saw it on Twitter because I had a conversation with Dana. Dana came to a Celtics game early in the year, and we hadn't met, and a couple of people kind of arranged a little backdoor meeting in the the little hallways in the Garden. And of course, because it's 2016, somebody snapped a picture of it and it got on the internet. But I'm in awe of what he accomplished, what the Fertitta brothers, what everybody in that organization accomplished. It's amazing when you think about it. When you think about how close it came to not happening, in the late 90s and the early 2000s to get it going. But yeah, as the sport grows, that kind of stuff just that's not going to play anymore. The more coverage you get, you have to adjust the way you run your business. If your sport's going to be the lead on SportsCenter, there are certain things you did in 1998 you can't do anymore. And that's just part of the, evolution of the sport. And obviously the media thing is one of them, because now the sport needs the coverage to grow. It's the oxygen. And I think the coverage needs to be better. I think it needs to be bigger. I think it needs to be better. It's much better the way, Bloody Elbow covers it and MMA fighting and all that stuff. The sport is covered very well at that level. It's the quote unquote mainstream. It's ESPN and Fox, and that's a bad example. Very, connected to the UFC, but it's that media, national media, ABC, CBS. That media does not know how to cover the sport yet, and that's what has to change.
I totally agree. And if I was working for ESPN or Fox, I would definitely be trying to push that agenda. But since I'm only at MMA Mania, Wrestling Observer, and AngryMarks.com, I'm doing what I can on those platforms. And when they ask me to cover UFC, I'm going to cover UFC. But my main assignment is Bellator. That comes first. That's what they pay me the money for. So with that in mind, I have to say we've got two big nights fights coming up in Tigerville. So before I wrap up with you, Sean, I want to get your encapsulated thoughts on the main events, because we've got two great ones coming at us. Eduardo Dantas and Joe Warren on the first night, and Darian Caldwell and Joe Manglo, two big rematches.
And if you would imagine 8 months ago when Darian Caldwell smashed Joe Warren, and it looked like his coronation, it looked like this long run was about, and that's what I've learned about the sport. One of my first shows, it was a 3-hour Valentine to Brandon Halsey. As he was the next big thing. He's going to be Brock Lesnar, and he's going to roll through everybody and dominate the middleweight division for the next whatever. And, he takes one, he gets the perfect cover, he lands the perfect shot, and all of a sudden it's over, and you can't jump in. It's not like Raw, where you can jump in the cage and cut. It didn't go the way we thought it was going to go. And you have moments like that. And, for Darian, of course, as off as he thought he was against Joe Manglo, he dominated that fight. And just shot in awkwardly to start the third round, and that's the beauty. As someone who's called hockey my whole life, and has done a lot of sudden death overtime. Every moment in the sport is sudden death overtime. I thought we did we did a great job with the production of presenting the drama. Phil Davis wiped out Liam on the scorecard. There's no question in winning that fight. But Liam was so dangerous that there were always moments during that fight that even though Phil had put it away on points, to me there was always danger there. That's the beauty of the sport.
Right.
Is that it is all sudden death.
At any moment in that 5th round, he could have landed one perfect punch and knocked Phil on his ass.
Yeah. Or caught him like he caught Tito, or, it wasn't likely to happen, but he was so strong in the ground, and he had the knockout power and it was, and here, you asked me, let me bring this full circle, you asked me about my own personal evolution and things like that. Things that I could not have known or couldn't have imagined when I started this, because as most people know, I started basically cold, a couple of months before when I first had a hint that this might be something in the works, when I first even cracked the book and started to study. And all of a sudden, here it was in a moment where Phil Davis was clearly up 4 rounds to none, facing someone who was dangerous on the ground. And all of a sudden, I realized, and this was something a year ago, this could not have been any farther from my mind, but this has to do with knowing what the right thing is as an announcer, but not having the tools when I first started. All of a sudden, I turned to my right and realized, if I'm going to ask anybody in the world about being up 4 rounds to none, challenging for a championship.
I know where you're going with this.
Chael's son is next to me.
Yes.
So I had this moment. It's not a matter of, hey, look how smart I am, look at me do my homework. I didn't make a big thing of it. I said, if anybody would know, and hardcore fans would get the reference. And I feel like that was in that moment, I had done my job, because that was something that in the NBA or doing a football game or doing hockey, that would have been second nature to me. But in that moment, all of a sudden you realize, okay, that's where studying something months earlier that you don't think is connected to what you're doing pays off. When all of a sudden, here you are, and you challenge yourself 4 rounds to none, and there's no way he can possibly lose, but he's in there against a dangerous guy in the 5th round, and all of a sudden, boom, bang, click, and I realized that Chael is the one sitting next to me at that moment, and you get the insight, because all of a sudden, a year earlier, I wouldn't have thought to get that specific insight from Chael, and yet here it was a year later, and I can say, duh, what people are probably thinking at home, that, Chael, tell me about being up 4-0 and, tasting that championship and not getting yourself in trouble. And so that's an example of something that you were asking about earlier, about the difference between now and, and when I first started.
And I think that's what we're going to be seeing this weekend as well. We're going to see 2 fights where both guys all 4 guys in both main events are looking to go out there and not repeat those past mistakes where they seem to have something in the bag and it all slipped away from them before it was over.
Yeah, and where Dantas is, I asked this about Liam McGarry, and I think we got our answer. There's still evolution to be done. Is Eduardo Dantas a good fighter, or is he truly is this a super star who's one of the best in the world? And, we're joking around, we're calling him McDontas around here this week, because now he wants to go up and he wants to hold both titles. He wants to fight at 145 too and challenge Daniel Strauss. And he has the swag that goes with the elite, world champion fighter skills. So if he can do the one thing he hasn't been able to do in Bellator and beat Joe Warren, that will probably pretty much cement that. And for Joe Warren, how many times has he been written off? There was no scenario after he got demolished by Darren Caldwell that this could possibly happen. And yet, Darren gets caught in 1 second. Joe Warren gets the extra fight and it looks great against Sirwan Kakai. Baby Joe doesn't make weight. Which, by the way, this is the thing to me. It's interesting. I haven't seen anybody else kind of bring this up. I'll probably talk about this during the show this weekend. In Bellator, the biggest upsets we've had this year. Baby Joe over Darren Caldwell. Certainly Alexis Dufresne over Marlis Kunin. Maybe not a huge upset, but certainly not the result we expected when Jordy Carhine knocked out Bubba Jenkins the way he did. And even go with the former Bellator fighter Will Brooks losing his last fight. What do those 4 fights have in common with the guy you didn't think was going, or the woman you think that was not going to win winning? All 4 of the huge underdog fighters that won didn't make weight. Maybe there's more to that than I talked to Darren Caldwell about that today, about those last 2 or 3 pounds that you lose. That takes a lot out of you. That's a very difficult thing. And yet that's one of those things that I kind of wish we had more discussion time. One of the things I love that the UFC does is they have those pre and post game shows. And I think that's something in our evolution that we're going to try to add as a post game presence, because all this great stuff happens and then it's, okay, we'll see you in 3 weeks or 2 weeks or whenever the next show is. But that to me is a great discussion we'll probably have tomorrow night, which is what happens when you miss weight. Because I know that when we talked about this, you and I talked about it, there was some discussion about why doesn't Baby Joe get the title shot? You can't give the title shot to a guy that missed weight.
Yeah, he's got to go out there and prove it. He's got to make the weight and he's got to win the fight. He's got to do both.
And so all these things is what I was saying about Joe Warren. It was impossible 8 months ago. Think of the things that would have to happen. Aaron Caldwell would have to lose to Baby Joe, which was what? 12, I don't look at the odds carefully, but it was like, what, 12-1, 14-1 underdog. That would have to happen. Baby Joe would have to miss weight, and Joe Warren would have to be impressive in a sort of comeback type fight. All three of those things happened, and so he's got a chance to become a 3-time world champion at the age of 40. So,
or 4-time, as he pointed out at the weigh-ins. He was like, "No, 4-time champion."
Yeah, I know. I heard that. Joe is fascinating on a variety of levels. But I keep an eye on Andre Fialho this weekend. I think another under the radar fight we have is Alima McFarland and Emily Ducote, because I don't think we've been terribly subtle in signing the type of fighters we have signed, to fight in that division. Many of them possess a certain quality that is deeply valued by the superficial male of the society in which we live. And that's the way of the world, and that's great. And yet, here comes Rebecca Ruth out of nowhere, and she beats Lena Ovchinnikova badly, dominates her. We have Emily Ducote coming out of nowhere, and she submits a superior BJJ player in Ruta Vargas, who's been, BJJ her whole life. And so all of a sudden Emily Ducote comes out of nowhere. Now she's fighting Alima McFarland, and I don't think we've made a final decision as to how we're going to. There are some people who feel, hey, you can't have a title fight between fighters who only had 5 or 6 pro fights. But to me, the WEC was about younger fighters and smaller fighters, and so to me, I don't think there's any downside in doing it. But that division is starting to pile up with fighters who are both talented and that people want to see. So that to me is under the radar fight this weekend too.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I said the same thing to my co-host on Glove Up or Shut Up. I said, listen, I know there's a 4-0 fighter and a 4-1 fighter, but the way this division is going, they're going to have to crown a champion sooner or later. And if Alima wins, she's in the catbird seat for that role. Yeah, I don't think there's that. Listen, there's no question to me that these are I think either one of them is, to tell you the truth. And obviously Anastasia Yankova has won her fights, but her last fight was the controversial decision. She actually showed me more in that fight than she did in the others, because she really, she showed she's a serious professional fighter. I don't think this is the division. They're all competing with each other, so why do they have to have 25 or 30 fights? I mean, and hopefully Julia Budd and Marlis Kuhn can finally get together and get that fight done, and we can have a champion at, 145 as well, and then you and I can cross our fingers, our dream come true, and have. Sorry, I'm laughing, but I'm more hoping that Marlis Kunin gets an opponent who meets the weight. Isn't unbelievable? I mean, she just, can't get a break. I thought one of the great moments of sports television I've been here, was when she lost the reaction shot. Her mind would not process that she lost that fight, that she had made that mistake and lost. She could not believe it, and she was so upset that Dufresne didn't make weight. She had psyched herself out in that fight. This is the great Marlis Kunin, but you know me, I've got this in my fantasy world. It's no question that, because I've been playing footsie about it on Twitter for a while, that you have the Julia Budd, Marlis Kunin title fight, and then when it's over, oh my God, that's Chris Cyborg's music, and have her walk down the ramp. Obviously, that's my sort of, we have our whole list of, internally, we have our whole list of fighters who are. I remember in the old days, you had the ABA, like way back before any of us were born, the ABA and the NBA, and there were players that kind of fit the style. The NBA was very buttoned down, and the ABA was more of the fun, the fun league. And I think any hardcore MMA fan can kind of look down the rosters and say, I thought Will Brooks is a great example. Will Brooks is really more of a UFC, quote unquote, UFC type fighter. You could see it. And there are guys on the UFC roster that are really more, more Bellator
type fighters. They could just, you feel like they could spread their wings more. There'd be more fun here. And that's kind of, my own personal campaign is that, it would be awesome to see, Chris Cyborg. I get riled up about that. I get personally offended at what she has to go through to make weight. I think it's ridiculous. It's embarrassing that an athlete of her caliber, one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all time, by the time it's all said and done, and she's, forced to put her body through this ridiculous, this nonsense to try to make 140, 135 is absurd.
Well, Coonan said the exact same thing when I interviewed her. She said it's a disgrace and it's a joke, and,
right.
and UFC should be ashamed.
Yeah, I don't want to listen. I don't question they've done their business very well. They know their business, and I wouldn't possibly question it. Like I said to Dana when I shook his hand and we talked, I have so much respect and appreciation for, what they've done for the sport and what they have built. But it doesn't mean I'm going to agree with every single thing they do. And, obviously she goes back to Strikeforce and does the Scott Coker thing and the Rich Chow thing. And, like I said, you can look down the roster and say it the other way too. There are guys that it'd be a fun, I don't want to be your editor. That'd be like a fun article. It sounds like a fun article. Like pick 5 UFC fighters should be in Bellator, and 5 Bellator fighters should be in the UFC. It's like and that to me, that's when the sport has truly grown. When you could do a talk show or write an article about it or have people comment on it or have a discussion on Twitter about it, that to me is when the sport has truly grown. You could have a fun conversation like that.
Well, if I was going to start with anybody that I would put on that list, it would be Donald Cerrone, because I want him to fight every lightweight, every welterweight in Bellator right now.
Yeah, he'd be, obviously he just signed the deal, but yeah, that was certainly an interesting one. It's also interesting to me how when both sides have to choose who they're going to sign, we go back to the thing about the being apples and oranges, about being a pay-per-view company versus TV ratings. It's a different, and obviously the TV ratings thing is changing with social media, people watching on their laptops and watching cord cutting and everything that's going on. But with the goals being different, you really are looking for different kinds of fighters. It's just another fun thing to watch in 2017.
We brought up the name Cyborg, and I only have Low Kick MMA and nobody else to go on. Rumor is UFC 208 would be headlined by Cyborg versus Holm at 145 pounds.
Yeah, I think that's probably what I would. I mean, that would certainly make the most sense if the run. I don't believe the run fight will ever happen. It just doesn't. For the weight reason, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm a Chris Cyborg fan, just in watching her and watching her interviews, in knowing a lot of the people here at Bellator that knew her at Strikeforce, and I'm a fan of her ex-husband. And again, it's one of the Cyborg Santos walk, one of them, I think the one in April, I talked about Chris in there that I think, and I talked to Cyborg Santos before the MVP fight in July, and, I do these fighter interviews a little differently, and, Jimmy does the X's and O's stuff, but I'm really interested in telling the stories of the fighters. So what I told him in July was, and I didn't want to overstep any boundaries, but I just think it's wonderful that they still are clearly friends and still clearly care about each other, and they communicate on social media, and they support each other, and they watch each other's fights. I just think it's a great thing. So I'm a fan of both of them. And so, you just become that's why I've become a Chris Cyborg fan in a variety of reasons. And when I go back to the beginning, we're talking about unions, and one of the things I love most about this, which is telling the stories of the fighters and getting them the respect they deserve for everything they do to compete at this level in this sport and the sacrifices that takes. It's really hard to not be a fan of you want to see someone like Chris Cyborg get what she has earned as being arguably the best there's ever been. But I will watch her when she fights, whether it's Holly or whoever they have coming next. Former Bellator fighter, Holly Holm.
Well, to get one last note in before I let you go, one of the things that made me a Cyborg fan was watching her fight in Invicta, which is why the first thing I said to Coonan when I got on the phone with her was, I want to thank you for something because you're the only woman to take Cyborg to 4 rounds. And she started laughing immediately and said, thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to watch the greatness of those Coonan, you watch those fights against Cyborg. It's, you appreciate her as an artist. And she's, by the way, just a fascinating human being to talk to. I mean, I couldn't be, I'm not sure I could be a bigger fan of anyone than Marlouse as well. And she's just a pioneer of the game. And when I first got into the NBA, I did WNBA games on the side, for the Minnesota team when I first went in the league. And at that time, the WNBA was in its infancy, 3, 4, 5 years in, and some of the older players were players that were just sort of getting a chance to taste that big league level that they had all worked so hard for. Think about the fights that Marlouse had to take. Think about, because, the women's game is obviously behind the men's game as far as attention and all this other stuff. So, someone who's fighting women's MMA 15 years ago, think about what that was.
Yeah, and she was fighting in open weight, right, open weight tournaments in Japan. That's how she had to get her name on the map.
And here we are. I'll say this again. I'm going to say it so everyone listening to this now will know. If you're over the age of 35 or 40, beware during an AJ McKee fight. I'll try to give you a warning so you can turn the sound down so it doesn't make you feel bad. But a reminder that the sport is young, but it's not that young anymore, and here's why. The Royce Gracie-Ken Shamrock draw, their second fight, AJ McKee was born that night. So a reminder that we're all older than we think we are.
Oh, I know it every single day. I know it every time I try to cover a fight, and it's like 8 hours long, and by the end of it, I'm like, okay, I need a cup of coffee and a couple of aspirin, because I'm still here at 2 a.m. waiting for this press conference. That's when I know I'm old, and I know with your travel schedule, you know it too.
Yeah, I know we waited 20 years for the first show at Madison Square Garden. I mean, we have to wait 20 years for it to be over. But,
yes. Oh, yeah.
Everybody wants to be on it. Alima Leigh McFarland cornered the first fight. Obviously, Liz was in the first fight ever, at MSG. And so I talked to Alima Leigh today about just being, in that environment. Obviously, Bellator is going to run New York at some point. That'll come together when it comes together. I, for one, am glad we didn't try to rush it. There was obviously a lot of conversation with Bellator trying to get in there first, and there was a serious discussion about it. And I think some people sort of misread the tea leaves on that. I don't think that would have been as well received as other people think it would have been. I think that the UFC earned that. That was they had spent years and years and years lobbying for that night, and I think that night, belonged to them. I think when we go to New York, I think the key will be to do it well and to do it right. And I think about being first is overplayed.
Right. Yeah, you can always be the first, but sometimes being the one who puts on a great show is better than being the first one.
Yeah, let's do it well. Let's do what we do, and we're trying to entertain everybody, every night. So lots of different. We want to, it's funny. This show. There's a certain number of shows Bellator has to do in a year. If you're wondering why we're doing this, is you as a WCW WWE fan back in the day, you'll appreciate. This is kind of our. Where I'm sitting here now, this is kind of our Universal Orlando, like TV taping home base. Like, cause we had to get a certain number of shows in. This year we have so many fighters that needed fights. We had so many big fights left to do. We didn't have enough shows to do it. That's why we had to add this, it's hard to find, to get a big venue on short notice wasn't going to happen. So we came back to our old home base here, our little, Universal Orlando spot. That's why we're doing 2 shows in the 222 for the price of none.
Well, I'm going to say you got one more home away from home, and that's the Mid-America Center in Council Bluffs. So don't be afraid to come back there, because I want to shake your hand and say how much I've enjoyed our conversations over the last year.
Well, it's been fun. We're going to be, I get that a lot now. I was like, hey, when's Bellator coming here? Because you're in that transition period from what was and all the old contracts to what is. There's only so many shows you can do, and, trying to find different, listen, believe me, as someone who lives right now in Boston, obviously spends most of his time on the East Coast. The fact that the majority of our shows are not, we get like 30 year Mohegan, no one will be happy with the New York show, than me. But, obviously, I think it goes without saying, we're going to be seeing Old Canada at some point, in 2017, the Warriors ready to fight. I think how the 170 division, if you're a Bellator fan, you got to be saying, what is going to happen at 170 here? Where does Rory step in? Does he step in like Ben Henderson did and fight for the title right away? Does he fight somebody else? What's next for MVP? What's going to happen with Warden Daly? Does Korshkov get a rematch right away? Does he have to fight somebody else? Now all of a sudden these divisions are getting deep enough that, I don't think you have to have 20 guys in a division. I think you can get lost that way. It's hard to keep track of. I know just as a fan, I find it hard sometimes to keep track of all the guys in the way. This is the 16th ranked guy in the UFC. And I think what I like about the Bellator roster is that it's manageable. And that it's more fan friendly, and it's easier to follow. And you got 7, 8, 9 guys, 10 top guys in each division, and you can follow them, tell their story.
I agree. And you do a great job of that, Sean. You tell those stories well, and I want to let you get some rest so you can continue to tell those stories tomorrow night and Saturday night live on Spike TV.
That was great, Paul. You could be the you could replace the guy that goes, coming up next.
Yeah, I could do that. Coming up next, Bellator 166. It's gonna be an awesome weekend, so I'll let you.
When I first started, I said, "Well, do you want to do that, like that kind of stuff?" I'm like, "No, let the Toucan Sam. It's better that way to me. I like it. It's a nice contrast from you're calling the fights and Jimmy and I are doing our thing, and then still to come, Andre Fialho, Chidi and Jugawani, live on Spike. I like it."
Yes, and we'll let Michael C. Williams do the big introductions, but for those of us who are not doing that, we've got fights to cover, so we've got long nights ahead. So, Sean, I want to just say thank you, and any plugs that you want to make other than 2 nights of exciting fights in Thackerville before I let you go tonight.
How about the exciting fights coming up in Florence, Italy? The exciting fights coming up in Dublin each of the next 2 weekends, and why don't we put in a plug for the airlines so they can get me there? I'm back. that would be the top of the list. We're gonna have James Gallagher fighting in Dublin, so the roof's gonna come off for that in a couple of weeks. King Mo is always entertaining, and there's a lot of good stuff. I was talking with the Carvalho man of free match. Gochi Yamauchi is fighting. That's coming up. Daniel Weichel's gonna fight, and Daniel Weichel, again, if this were a talk show topic, you'd be saying, why is Daniel Weichel fighting? Is Pitbull going to get the next shot? We're staring at Pitbull Strauss 4 coming up, early 2017. I wouldn't be surprised if that gets announced pretty soon. So there's now people, it's not as easy to get a title shot in Bellator as it used to be. A lot of competition in these spots, and how it all plays out, I can't wait to see. So I don't need to plug anything but the show itself. Let's get it on.
Absolutely. Let's get it on. We've got a great year to finish out with Bellator. Big action coming up here in January and February for 2017. So we'll let the action unfold, as you just said yourself. So, Sean Grande, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with me tonight.
You got it, man.